space is dedicated to start conversations of women in the arts and for navigating the contemporary art world. Today's program, Progress in Exile, Maintaining Equitable Art Spaces, is hosted by Daricia DeMarr,
Daricia,
Daricia, co-founder of Black Women Visual Arts, and then Suhaly Bautista-Carolina, director of public programs and partnerships at the American LGBTQ Museum, and Brianna Beckham, art liaison at Wirth. And without further ado, let the panel
Thank
begin.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you all for being here. I feel like it's a really important time to have this conversation. I think all of us who are arts workers or art adjacent are sort of seeing the changes that have been happening in our community from a perspective of progress in the sector of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, in researching for this topic, I really was like, where have we come from in terms of funding the arts? And I thought about the WPA from the New Deal and the Philip Morris Foundation. These were sort of the big drops in the bucket for arts funding, in addition to, of course, the NEA. But the WPA, like, for example, we have Norman Lewis, and let me see, I have in my notes here, Jacob Lawrence and Charles Austin. They were artists that were funded. And through that, the WPA Art Fund, it was mostly males, but it still was providing funding for artists. And it kind of seems like there's this maybe reactionary component of like, we want to fund art to maybe take into account the war or people smoking cigarettes and these like sort of efforts in the public arena. So how, and if we fast forward now to today, and we saw in 2020, and BWBA also was on the receiving end of this, a lot of attention on what are we doing about diversity in art spaces. Well, let's give funding. We had this terrible death of George Floyd and put the United States on the world stage. And we had these organizations to say, oh, we need to now have equity in the arts. And I don't know if you all can speak a little bit about where you were at the time professionally in 2020 and some things that maybe you saw kind of occur in that moment. And then we'll fast forward to today.
Yeah.
Do you want to go?
Sure.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for convening this conversation and bringing me and Bree into it. And thank you to Future Fairs for having us. I was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2020. I was the Senior Managing Educator of Audience Development and Engagement, longest title I've ever had. I was in the Education Department, and I was overseeing a project, a residency for socially engaged artists who work in their communities and are actually thinking about the impact that their artistic practice can have in the communities that they serve all across New York City. It's called the Civic Practice Partnership Artist in Residence Program. And I remember, to use your words, this reactionary sort of response to what was happening. I think all institutions were sort of echo chambers of one another, right? Like once that black square started circulating, it just like continued on and on and on. And folks, I generally, I feel like social media works in this way where you don't really have time to digest exactly what is happening. It's not even humanly, scientifically possible to really intentionally process all of the information that we have. And so I think we just sort of like mimicked each other without much intention or thought. And when we finally were able to pause and think, even just with the example of the black square, I was like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. You know, that's actually maybe a silencing or a cop-out response to not having to engage with a deeper dialogue around racism, institutionalized racism, and what we might, how we might combat that as institutions and our spaces. So I remember that reactionary response, and it definitely had a place at the institution where I was employed at the time. Yeah.
So in 2020, I was actually still in college. So I think my perspective is very different because I wasn't out in the world yet. I wasn't in the job market yet. But because of my age and generation, I think we were still very active on social media during George Floyd. So I think that really influenced and shaped how I kind of like saw how things were moving and things were going, because I think it was one of the first times where we saw social media utilized in that way for protests and also for education. But then we also saw how social media could be a little harmful and maybe can spread half-truths or false truths. And yeah.
Were you aware of how, because I'm assuming that you were still keyed into what was happening in the art world.
Yeah.
Did you have an awareness, like were you able to step back and see, like, or question, like, what's happened? Because I think that's actually a very unique perspective to have in that moment, and then be able to enter the workforce and sort of determine and weigh in on, like, what was your reaction to seeing, like you said, the Black Square. Every art organization I know had some PR response, some mission or something. Do you kind of recall what your thought process was as somebody who's like, I'm getting ready to enter this workforce? Is this going to make an impact on?
It was a few different thoughts. In one way, it kind of allowed me to learn a lot about Black art, because there was a lot more focus on Black art, especially from these institutions. But also another way, I think it gave me a false sense that these institutions care about diversity, because 2020, 2021, that was when I really entered the workforce, and that was when all of these companies, they had DEI, they had that sort of thing, and then to kind of have them like kind of disappear. But like for a period, it was like I was experiencing something that wasn't the norm, and then it became the norm.
The norm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then a follow-up question to you, Suhaly. At the Met, do you know what conversations were being had, I guess, on the executive levels about the response? Was the museum staff, or like, how involved were the people in the museum outside of the directors, and sort of involved, or did y'all have any voice into the response, as a person of color?
Yeah, that's a great question. Pulling back, because I have a lot of feelings about my time there. It was really challenging in some aspects, but also really rewarding and really in a lot of aspects. It's also a place that employs 2,000 people, so it's like a small city, right? Well, you can imagine that we're not all having the same conversations.
Absolutely.
Right? Leadership is having one conversation, education's having, even within education, there's teens are having one. Everything is really siloed. And so we were not all united, I think, in the messaging that was being externally shared by the institution. And I think it's really hard, just to give credit to a big institution, it's really hard to convene everyone and actually say, yes, we all agree, that's the message that we all want to say, because we're all our own individual, unique people that are living different experiences within our bodies. So I just remember as a Black woman feeling very conflicted, right? Like, I thought, I know what to do, but then I have to do it.
Yeah.
You know? So assuming leadership, extra leadership in that time was something that became a burden for a lot of people of color in institutions, right? You're now assuming this role where you are educator of DEIA unofficially on top of all the other jobs that you already have. So it was very, but then you're also in these spaces where you know that your voice is needed, so how do you step up but step back enough that your white allies can have can take the reins to some regard, right? Otherwise we're talking about additional labor on mostly black women in this institution, but black arts workers, right? So it was very, I had to make choices about how much of myself I wanted to offer in this regard.
Yeah, it's fascinating too, because with BWBA, we had launched in 2019, and then it was like the perfect storm, because Lauren Jackson Harris, who was adamant about our organization, is called Black Women in Visual Art. And I was like, we really want that to be real confrontational? Like, we really want to do that? And she was like, no, that's the title, because that's what it is.
Yes.
And then George Floyd happened, COVID. Because we have Black women art, people are, we just were not prepared for the tidal wave of attention and support, because we had to start to ask ourselves when people would say, well, what can we do? And then we're like, well, what can you do? So it was this interesting moment of having a spotlight and then really being able to have to respond to that.
Yeah.
And so we now fast forward to today, 4 years, just about, very short time. And all of a sudden, and I have to tack on this affirmative action piece, because that's a part of it. Affirmative action, DEI, leadership, being fired, shifting gears on what seemed in the moment to be a grand progress from like, okay, we're, Roosevelt in the New Deal is giving lots of money to artists and art organizations, to, Philip Morris, which was really high profile, Jasper Johns and Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol, not Jackson Pollock, but Andy Warhol and Jasper Johns, and having these grandiose exhibitions. But it's like, okay, question mark, we really need to have some public relations response to, our tobacco industry, to this DEI response to George Floyd. And the statistics show that diversity is ideal for innovation. Most people agree. I think there was a statistic that said 91% of Americans believe that DEI should be funded. So, here we are now, and I wanted to bring up, I'm just going to take a minute and check my notes here. What I do want to do, and I don't know if you all saw this, I'm going to just read an excerpt of T.K. Smith. He actually was in Atlanta for a short while. He's a young brother, brilliant curator, writer, was hired at the Barnes Foundation. And I'll just read what he he posted this on Instagram on April the 17th. I've sat back and been quiet following my firing from the Barnes at the advice of several mentors, stating that I would jeopardize my future in this field if I were to speak. However, considering the current mass layoffs at the Barnes, where several of my brilliant colleagues have lost their jobs, I feel compelled to say something, especially as the majority of these colleagues are Black or people of color. And he goes on to detail the experiences that he's had. And it's just extremely troubling when you have brilliant people who are, for no real reason, seemingly, being ousted from these roles. And I just don't know, have you all sort of seen any shifts and changes in this sort of, this like recent moment? We see, I feel like what happens politically and what happens in academia always sort of affects art and culture. We can talk about Claudine Gay and others. So have you all sort of experienced, and not particularly in your workplace, but what have you seen that may speak to the zeitgeist of this moment?
I would say nothing personally,
Yeah.
but I would just say, the art world has always been lacking in diversity.
Absolutely.
And I would say from my perspective, it's really just been seeing a lot of, like they're trying to make up for it, but it's not genuine. So that's what I've seen experience. You have all of these, like black art initiatives popping up, or like black art fairs, or, but when you look around, they're usually still like white spaces, So there's definitely a lack of diversity, even if the artist is black, looking at like, okay, well, who's buying the artwork, or who's like collecting the artwork, who's even like exposed to this, who's even like learning about it or seeing it. So I think that's what I've seen in this moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, what happened to TK happened all across the art world during 2020 and to 2023, let's say. Something really beautiful, I think, that happened as a result of the pandemic were these sort of channels, I'm going to call them underground channels of arts workers. Like, we all knew we needed to talk to each other wherever we were, to kind of talk about, what's your strategy? What are you doing? What are y'all talking about over there? Like, how are you combating this issue? Which I thought and continue to think is like a long-lasting positive impact of that time. But the truth is that we were watching black arts professionals be elevated to these leadership positions with no support, right? With just all the burden of the responsibility of that role, but no real investment in their success. And so that was really hard to watch, because you're like watching a car crash, an inevitable one, and there's nothing you can do about it. But the real show of support would have been to say, there has never been a person of your experience in this seat. You will need more support. And so now we will have to equip you with a coach, resources, whatever you need in order to watch you excel in that point. But if that was never the intention, then those resources would never be allotted,
I think it also is a problem within. It's not enough to just have like one black leader. It's the institution itself has decades, sometimes even centuries of excluding diversity. So I also think that's been what we've been seeing in the art world as well, or even like beyond the art world.
Yeah, it's the container that's broken. Mm-hmm. The container cannot hold, black leadership necessarily, not in the way we need it to. So.
And I think too, there was a piece that came up in some of the research about having difficult conversations. And I don't know, is that something that you all have had to navigate at all? The difficult conversations in these spaces? And sort of what has been the result? Because I feel like that is a big part of it. Like you were talking about the 2,000 employees at the Met, and then like you have, the leadership is having this conversation, and so it goes to show, it's an example of 2,000 people are perhaps having 1,500 different conversations. And so I'm wondering, have you all had an opportunity or maybe missed an opportunity to have a difficult conversation?
You know what? I wonder if I'm at a point in my career where I can choose, you know, because I'm tired sometimes, or I choose to not be the one that is assigned to have to do that kind of labor. So there were moments where it depended, right? Like I found out who my white allies were in that time, which I think was a good thing, right? I think I could understand who was willing to like make themselves the face of the conversation so that I wouldn't have to be in that position. So that was like a positive outcome of that time. But my strategy in those moments too, if I'm in the room, is to ask a lot of questions. Like, I don't necessarily give the answer. I'm just like, what makes this a challenging conversation for you? You know, or what do you, I'll just like, the best teachers are the ones that point you back to yourself, right? So I think that my strategy for engaging in conversations that may be difficult to my colleagues was also always to kind of like allow them to come to a conclusion on their own with my guidance, but not where I'm doing the labor of extracting the information from them. So I found myself in that position a lot of times.
I haven't really had the difficult conversations, to be honest. I think being in the position of young, new to the workforce, and like, you know, the only black person, I think it's a little tricky, and I think a lot of young people feel the same way because there's a whole lot of other issues that come with that as well. But I think in a way, I like having those conversations with people who are even younger than me. I find that's a little easier and also like helpful. You know, like if someone asks me like, hey, like, what's this place like, or what do you think about this? Then I think it's a very honest and helpful conversation.
Can I say something to what Bree said? Because what Bree is talking about is like the risk of saying something when you're a black woman in the arts. You have to weigh that risk. Like you have to be like, if I say this, or depending on how I say this, or no matter how I say this, it will land in a certain way that will be read as, you know, aggressive or direct or... So I think like what you're talking about is a real, not an issue, but like that's a risk, you know? And the world, this world, just like all other fields, works in that way where like you can get blacklisted in this field to say like, yeah, you know, I worked with her and she's difficult, so.
She's difficult, exactly.
You know, so you do have to weigh the risk of being outspoken.
And that also makes me think of it was like a chart I saw showing how a lot of organizations, their way of being diverse is so, like, you know, companies are like a pyramid. Everyone at the bottom, that's where the most diversity is, but as you get to the top, it's not. So I think in those situations, like, it's great that you have, you know, diversity at like any level, but it makes it even harder to have these tough conversations when there's no one else that has, you know, done the work, has climbed the ladder to like advocate for you, speak to it. So,
And that sense of risk and then maybe audacity seen from the perspective of those individuals on the other side. And I think that's something, just going back to TK, in his post, he was saying, I tried to do this. And I'm told I'm a failure. I don't have experience. I also wanted to talk about, because boards come up in this conversation, there's this diversity that has to happen all around in the market. Like you mentioned, Bree, the collectors, the collectors in the museums, the private collectors, the supporters outside of, like, let's say if you're at a gallery, you get media support. All of these things sort of fall into play. So if that doesn't really exist, then how does it exist? And so that's just a segue too, because I was talking to Suhaly about the board at the American LGBTQ plus museum. I have never seen such a diverse group of people. I was just like, this looks like a place that I want to be. This looks like I want my neighborhood to look like this.
Yeah.
And so I guess as I've been thinking about this, it's like, what is the solution? And I do think it is in the realm of what's happening at your institution, where it's like we are having to do this ourselves and maybe not even rebuild, just build. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how where you are now,
Yeah.
and the landscape there could shift the narrative a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. I think that was the allure for me of taking this position. I don't know if you all heard, but the director of public programs at the American LGBTQ plus museum, which is a forthcoming museum that will open in New York in 2027, that really thinks about the history of queer people in this country. Like, what does that look like? Where did we come from? What are our activism roots? And where are we going in the future? And before we open our physical galleries, we're doing programming, traveling exhibitions. We're just trying to build an audience before we actually open our space. And the excitement of being part of a leadership team that was building an institution for me was I asked myself, when are you going to get a chance to build a museum, in your career, right? That doesn't happen very much. And also, when will you have a chance to use your energy to build something instead of deconstructing something, yes, right? Oftentimes we're in these spaces and we're trying to undo, detangle, fix this. All of that energy, there's only a maximum amount of energy that you have, and if you're using it all to undo, then you don't really have the creative energy to build and to make things. And most of us in this field are creative people, right? So I was really fascinated by this invitation to be part of something from the root, right? To be able to dig the foundation with my values, with people that I trusted were aligned with me. I think the board, and it's an amazing board, like Mia is saying, it's a majority BIPOC board. Everyone is queer, genderqueer, gender nonconforming, trans folks on the board, folks with disabilities on the board. It's a really incredible board, and I think it's a testament to that this can happen. We can do this.
Right.
But we also have the advantage of building it from the start, right? So when you're talking about institutions that are 200, I think Brooklyn Museum turns 250 next year. It's these institutions are really, they're going to struggle to be different if they choose to be different. And the way we used to talk about it at the Met was, it's change at the Met was steering the Titanic. It will take time if you decide to change course, right? So that's saying a lot, because you have to choose, and then you have to go. You have to choose, and then you have to move, and you have to be okay with the time that it takes for change to occur. And I think that we have the advantage of building it from the start with people who are oh, these are our values.
Yeah.
So we're going to demonstrate those values to you from the beginning.
Yeah.
And the way that we signal that, one of the ways that we signal that is with the construction of the board.
Yeah. Like I said, I was really impressed. I don't think I've ever seen a board like that.
It's great.
You see them and it's oh, okay, the usual suspects.
Yeah.
But I just think that to me seems to be the route.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, like you were saying, dismantling. Who wants to dismantle and then go back and it's like the Three Little Pigs or something.
I think we need it all. I think we need people in there pulling on this string,
yeah,
under, outside. I think we need all the strategies, to be honest.
And I don't know, I have a separate question for you, Brie, because I know you do a lot of work with artists. Do you see artists I know you do too. But we all work with artists. But I wonder, do you see artists weighing in on this conversation and the position of the artist in this moment?
Honest answer? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
On camera, girl.
I think definitely there are some artists that's really important to them. I would say there's some that's not. I think there's a bit of a disconnect with artists when they quote unquote make it. You know, I think there's a weird tug and pull between wanting to be known as a black artist or wanting to be known as just an artist. So then like a lot of these artists try to steer away from, well, I don't want to be like only known for like my blackness. I want to be, you know, so I think it's a weird line to like walk. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of artists, even artists that we work with, that's a big importance to them. Even like for younger generations, trying to educate younger generations on like just the overall art ecosystem. You know, starting like nonprofits, bringing in like students to like gallery tours, studio visits, all that stuff. Yeah.
What about you, Suhaly? I don't know if you want to chime in on it. Have you any examples?
Yeah, I have a really good one, but I'm not going to name any names because I'm not messy. I love watching artists like stand 10 toes down on their values and challenge institutions to be better. So I remember being at one of these institutions, and there was a big artist that we all love who wanted the execution of their project to be done by black people, all the way from beginning to end, the architecture, the design, that was their request, intention, demand, really. And even at the risk of this project being canceled, moved back, they did not waver, because that's what was of value to them. And I thought that was beautiful, and I was so inspired by that. I think that that's a position of privilege. Like a lot of artists can't say no, so I also want to recognize that. And it's not every artist that can say no to an opportunity, right? You have to weigh your positionality within these circumstances. But I love when artists are like, nope, that's not how I want it. You know, that this is very important to me, and so we're going to do it with you, or I could bring my talents elsewhere or do them on my own or do them with my community. I love seeing that. I think it's so, it's just a radical way of being in the art world.
And you're right, if you are an artist at a certain level in your career,
you could do that.
You can do that. I've heard of an artist who is curious about who is collecting this. I need...
Yeah.
I mean, in the
Whose
galleries
house is
do
my
that
art
too,
gonna
but
be
to
in?
be an artist, to have say, you know, that's a big, huge deal. I want to make sure we have some time for questions. I did have this last question for the panel, but is there a lesson here on how to proceed as art professionals regarding funding and support in the future? Because I keep hearing that, you know, these institutions committing, perhaps in a performative way, a reactionary way. I don't know if there will be another moment like 2020, but how do we, like, what is the lesson, do you all think, in this, in 4 short years? If anything, it could just be something to think about, you know.
I guess more on something to think about. There's still a lot more work to be done.
Right.
A lot of stuff can be reactionary, but to just stay the course. And also, real change, I think, starts from the younger generation.
Yeah.
I know everyone says that, that's kind of cliche, but there's a lot of entry barriers, I would say, to the art world and to many different professions. And we start to see when some of these entry barriers are re-looked at or just gone away altogether, we're starting to see a little more diversity, because we have these institutions, they're like, okay, we only want candidates from this school, or we only want candidates from this, so that it's already very limiting. But, yeah, and I think education, first and foremost, educating the youth that, maybe career in the arts is possible. And, this is what they can do, and they can start something themselves. You don't have to work at a museum, or, you don't have to work at a gallery. You can be the change.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to pull on that last string because I think that the more we turn towards each other, the more solutions we will identify. I was at a really beautiful strategic meeting for the Black School. I don't know if you all know the Black School, but it's literally a Black political art school that's being created by Shawnee Peters and Joseph Coulier in New Orleans. And they're raising some money right now. They got a $1.1 million grant from the Mellon Foundation, and now they need $400,000 more to create this literal schoolhouse in the 7th Ward. And they gathered 50 of us in a room, and they were like, the campaign is We Fund Us. And we were like, what? The campaign is it's us, fund. We're going to make this happen. We're the ones that are going to raise the $400K. And that doesn't mean you're coming out of pocket with $400K. It means 10 people, 3 people, 4 people, you have a home, you have somebody in a foundation, and together our resources will help us arrive at our goal. And I just feel like that's always been the solution.
Absolutely.
I just feel like the solution is with each other, and we will localize our efforts in order to get what we need, and that has never not worked. So yeah, I just feel like we need to turn to each other a little bit more and stop worrying about the big shiny things and sort of understand what we need locally. And I feel like if everybody did that, the impact is, we'll see change in all of those little pockets, and it's very inspiring. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think turn towards each other and We Fund Us.
And it's not just about Black people and people of color. It's about it's like your board.
Oh yeah.
Seriously, it looks like that because 91% of Americans agree. Diversity, even in I would say in the workplace, in our schools, in our communities. It makes for the most innovation. I would say the most fun.
Yeah.
So everybody may not be there, but those of us who have the same ideals will be.
Yeah.
And we do it together.
Yeah.
So thank you guys. I don't know if there's any questions, if we have time, if anybody has something they want to say. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yay.
And whoever.
Yeah.
I love what you're building.
Yeah.
And if there are institutions in the room that want to say, instead of deconstructing, we're interested in your building,
Yeah.
what should they throw away and start doing what they want to keep building?
Institutions that want to build need to throw away. Whew. I don't know how much time we have.
Can I?
Please.
I think one place to start, this might make some people upset. Maybe they need to throw away unpaid internships.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Because there's already a very, very small percentage of people that can do that.
Absolutely.
So that's just not. You're already gonna you're already eliminating diversity just off of that.
Yeah.
That is, what are they? Key, Jules,
Yeah.
whatever they're called. Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
100% agree with that. That's
Yeah.
a really great place to start.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's hard with horizontal, vertical leadership structures to kind of like flatten that out, but I feel like decision making can't happen at the top exclusively, right? Like, there has to be a more, I don't know, can museums be decolonized? Is this forever question? But like, I think that there needs to be more inclusion of voices when decisions need to be made, and with the inclusion of young people, but also just like more people need to be in the rooms where decisions are made, I think, too. Yeah.
What's that?
Thank you all for like taking this panel, sharing your thoughts, being here. That means a lot. I know there's so many other things to be busy with, and to spend your time here. Thank you. I really like
Thank you.
the analogy that you used about redirecting the Titanic. It's seemingly like so that it doesn't crash into the
Iceberg.
that analogy really kind of sounds like playing flowers over unmarked graves. And not to be contentious, but like playing flowers over unmarked graves, and it's like, oh, like either they're not there, or like just something like that. Really within the space of like the Titanic crashed, and from that crash we learned so much about, all right, boats, if they are going to be this big or larger, like better protocols, etc. So with museums and contexts, like, do you think that maybe we should push for the Titanic to crash, so that from the rubble, from that rupture, we can build something that's safer, that's better, that's not the Titanic, but has a greater potential to make resonant change?
I think all regimes have a 200 to 300 year lifetime, right? We're getting up on that for a lot of institutions. So I would focus on the second half of what you said and not put any of your energy towards making this thing crash. It is on whatever course it chooses to be on. And institutions can change if they decide to change, or they can decide to sunset and rebuild themselves with new models, new systems, new strategies, new boards, new values. They can make the decisions that they want to make. If we're invested in those spaces, we can be part of that change. And many of us are. Many of us are inside of institutions. We're institutionalists, whether we like it or not. And we make change from within. That's our choice. But it's also the choice of the institution whether they want to refocus their energy. So for you, I feel like you said two things. Do we want this thing to crash and burn? I don't know. I don't. It's on whatever pathway it's on. But I want to focus my energy on building the thing, the new thing, that I know is going to be like infused with all that positive sort of learning that I have acquired across my time, right? Yeah. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, really great question. And I think it's something that I see a lot, at least on social media, where people are just like, let it burn. Let it burn. Dumpster fire is happening over here, but we have spaces like the American LGBTQ plus museum, and Mokata, and what's the one, Fahamu's, Adama. I mean, artists and creators are like, let's just do it ourselves. And it may take 200 or 300 years. It may, eclipse our time, but a lot of these, the Guggenheim, the High Museum, they were started by like a rich white lady. That was like, and luckily we have so many wealthy people now who are the Dean Collection, who are like, look, we don't do it too. We can do it too.
Yeah.
So
it's not all bad. Like I mean, I say that I'm being cheeky, but like I believe in museums. I want to believe in I love museums, So museums are the way I learned about a lot of Black contemporary artists, right? And a lot of Black contemporary artists get their visibility, shine, money, get into collections because of museums, right? So it's not like, I do think a redirection is needed, and if that can't happen authentically and in a way that's long lasting, then we know the outcome of that situation. But I also think that in the meantime, that doesn't, for me, I'm like, in the meantime, what can we do to improve this setting for artists, for audiences, for kids whose art education maybe comes exclusively from museums because their public school doesn't have art funding, whatever, all the things that we do know are positive about museums, I'm invested in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah, I was saying too, I read recently how Cheech Marin has a museum. And it looks amazing of just his collection. I'm like, yo, more of this.
Always like the more of like considering like Black collectors and etc. Like how do you think we should approach the power struggle of like the Black bourgeoisie, maybe being that middle ground between like resident change and keeping things the same? Because it seems like how art has been, it's very exclusionary to have the Black bourgeoisie be like, oh, like we're collectors too, but then still being classist in a way that keeps people out. You know, how do we approach like that as a middle? I can tell that's a question.
That's difficult. No, I mean, you ask, the questions are great. I just don't even know where to even begin with that one. Because, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead,
I think
Bree.
it's a conversation that a lot of people don't want to have. You know, even like working at a gallery, you have to have, you know, millions of dollars to even like buy like Black art. So it's complicated, but I think there's other ways to support besides just buying art. And I think there's so much focus on collectors, and I think a lot of places need to shift their focus onto other art patrons. Because just because you can't collect a $3 million piece doesn't mean that the institution or the gallery should just not engage with you at all. You know, so I think that's something that galleries and museums should maybe put a larger focus on, because most of the general world population will never be able to afford like a $3 million art piece, you know? So I think if these galleries and institutions want to grow and last, I think more focus needs to be on majority of the people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I also think you don't have to participate in that. Like, I think you can collect your local artists. Like, you know artists, so you can. I don't know. Maybe I'm talking too much about choice, but it's beautiful to see art. But also, like, most artists don't get collected from the beginning of their career. And a lot of collections get started just because someone really loves your craft and just like continues to collect until someone sees it, and then, you know, so I think there's a powerful, you don't have to collect a $3 million artwork, but you can collect a $300 artwork by somebody that you know who lives on your block, and you're like contributing to their, you know.
Commission art. It's sorry, go ahead, Bree.
Yeah, like, because a lot of people think, and I talk to people all the time, a lot of people think that all art has to be like 5-6 figures.
Yeah.
But you know, like you can buy a really great piece of art for less than like shoes.
Yeah.
Like literally. So I think it's also about like educating.
Yeah.
Thank you guys
Thank
so
you.
very much.
Thank you,
everybody.
all.